You have no idea how long that took me.
Hello, my name is Micah Baker. I'm a student at Texas Tech University, and this is ADHD.
I'm not trying to debate diagnostic trends because the evidence is irrefutable. The past several decades have indeed seen a continuous rise in ADHD diagnosis. And I'm not here to disagree with the fact of its prevalence in media and culture, because ADHD has absolutely seen a spotlight in this past TikTok era and all over social media. That is, I agree with completely. What I'm here to discuss instead is my disagreement with these articles that say that this is an issue. On the whole, my argument is a semantic one. It's not against the numbers, but more so against what you should be labeling it as. ADHD isn't something that is currently being overdiagnosed. My argument is that ADHD is something that was previously misdiagnosed and is now being corrected. Overdiagnosis is the diagnosis of a condition that would not have caused symptoms or issues. It can be harmful if it leads to unneeded treatments or psychological stress. Misdiagnosis is when a wrong diagnosis is made. For example, if a person is diagnosed with cancer when they have a benign cyst. One of the papers I'm here to disagree with states that overdiagnosis leads to overtreatment, and dramatic increases in prescriptions for adult ADHD during the last decade should arouse concern. Misdiagnosis, on the other hand, means that some people with ADHD is incorrectly diagnosed, and for others it's missed entirely. Many people with ADHD struggle for years before they finally receive a diagnosis. Let's talk about the DSM. The DSM5 criteria for adult ADHD are so broad that they fail to distinguish between illness and normal variation. Alright, let's look. What are those changes? So, in 1987, the DSM-3 combined both inattentive and hyperactive into one diagnosis, both under the same roof, so to say, ADHD. Whereas before that, the term ADD was used for inattentive, and they were considered separate conditions. But as research has continued to develop, they have been put under the same roof as different flavors, I guess. Then in DSM-4, the diagnosis was divided into subtypes, predominantly inattentive, predominantly hyperactive, and combined. And so more of a Venn diagram. And then in 2013, in DSM-5, the definition of ADHD was indeed broadened. A big difference between DSM-4 and DSM-5 was that patients who had autism and patients who had ADHD were now able to be diagnosed with the other one and have both conditions simultaneously. While in DSM-4 that was not possible. And so this change in DSM allowed for a large group of people with autism to now be diagnosed with ADHD, which greatly bumps up the numbers. The inability to distinguish between illness and normal variation is inherently an ableist mindset. If symptoms prevent function in a patient, and holistic practices don't work for solving those issues, then there's your distinguishment right there. There is no symptomatic line in the sand. There is no biological marker. You can't get a blood test to see if you have ADHD. These issues that people struggle with are inherently fuzzy. That's why it's a spectrum.
Some people with ADHD have very strong memorization skills, attention to detail, and memory, while others suffer in these regards. Most of us are somewhere in between. a diagnosis should only be given when these symptoms cause major concerns in the patient's life. If symptoms don't serve as a hindrance for a person's life, then a diagnosis should not be given. This rule of impairment prevents doctors from overdiagnosing ADHD. ADHD does not merely fluctuate over time, it remains a persistent condition, challenging the notion that temporary symptoms lead to overdiagnosis.
Adult patients with symptoms may claim that they had the same problems with attention during childhood, but that they were not recognized. However, given the high level of interest in diagnosis during the last several decades, this may not be very likely. I'm sorry, what? What this paper is basically saying is, you don't have ADHD. You are lying about your history to a doctor because ADHD is a fad and you want to be a part of it. This paper completely tramples over the gender disparity of ADHD.
ADHD in girls, particularly inattentive type, can manifest quite differently than it can in boys of the same age group. These manifestations can come in the form of forgetfulness, distractibility, poor attention to detail, daydreaming. Put simply, a hyperactive boy who repeatedly bangs on his desk will be noticed before the inattentive girl who twirls her hair while staring out the window. The notion the paper makes that adults are coming to a psychiatrist and saying that they suffer from the symptoms of ADHD but were not diagnosed in childhood fails to consider all of the women who were not diagnosed as girls back in school. While the ratio for child diagnosis of ADHD for male to female is 4-1, the ratio between adults being diagnosed with ADHD in gender is much closer to 1-1. These statistics exemplify the fact that adults with ADHD who are getting diagnosed are the majority women who are trying to catch up and fix a misdiagnosis from the past. Societal forces, such as competition in school settings, can motivate patients to seek stimulant prescriptions, which, in turn, require a diagnosis of ADHD. Indeed, it is well established that stimulants are being passed from one person to another outside the medical system. In summary, the paper is putting blame for the rise of diagnosis rates on prescription stimulant misuse. They're saying that people are going to the psychiatrist to get a diagnosis and faking symptoms in order to obtain medication to either use themselves or to sell or give to others. In people with ADHD, the right type and dose of stimulant can help improve focus and reduce hyperactivity. In people without ADHD who don't need the additional neurotransmitters, the effects can be different. They can feel euphoric, energetic, and confident. Those symptoms, combined with a drug that impacts the reward system, absolutely has the potential to be abused and addicted by people without ADHD. Up to 17% of college students have reportedly misused stimulants in the past, which is not an insubstantial demographic. But studies show that college students who misuse stimulants tend to study less time than their peers and tend to have lower GPAs overall. These studies question the notion that stimulants actually enhance cognitive functioning in college students who do not have ADHD. Furthermore, in 2019, the rate for prescription stimulant misuse in young adults was 5.8%. In 2021, that number dropped to 3.7%, showing that prescription stimulant misuse rates are not growing tangentially to diagnosis rates. These inverse statistics completely debunk the notions being made in the paper. Overall, the rate of diagnostic trends is not an issue worthy of being labeled as overdiagnosis. A larger issue is that ADHD is so often missed. The recent rise in adult ADHD diagnosis can't be explained away by the nefarious intentions of patients. It can, however, be explained by the many who've gone their entire lives suffering in silence. The overlooked, the kids achieving grades on par with their class but using every ounce of their strength. The mom who remembers all the meaningless things but forgets her kid's birthday. These numbers represent everyone who fell through the cracks, and preventing something like that from happening again is much more important than villainizing the patient. Thank you.